in the quiet suburbs of a mid-sized American town called Willow Creek, where maple trees lined the streets and porch lights glowed like fireflies after dusk, lived a 34-year-old mechanic named Elias Harper. Everyone called him Eli. He fixed transmissions by day, drank black coffee by the gallon, and kept mostly to himself. No wife, no kids, no drama. Just the hum of engines and the occasional classic rock playlist to drown out the world. Eli had never believed in anything he couldn't hold in his hands or diagnose with a wrench. God? Maybe up there somewhere, but not personally invested in a guy who lived paycheck to paycheck and still owed 3 months on his truck loan. Destiny? Sounded like something for movie heroes, not a man whose biggest thrill was beating his own lap time on the back roads. But lately, something had shifted. It started small, a restlessness that crept in around midnight like an itch he couldn't scratch. He'd lie in his narrow bed in the upstairs apartment above the garage, staring at the water-stained ceiling, heart thumping for no reason. The clock would tick past 1 a.m., then 2, then 3. Sleep refused to come. Not because of noise, Willow Creek was dead silent after 10, but because his mind felt wide awake, tuned to some frequency he didn't understand. One night, it got worse. Eli sat up suddenly, sweat beading on his forehead, even though the window fan was blasting cool air. His chest felt tight, not like a heart attack, but like something massive was pressing down from the inside, demanding release. He swung his legs over the bed, bare feet hitting the cold hardwood, and whispered to the empty room, "What the hell is going on?" That's when the title hit him. Not as words on a screen, but as a clear, insistent thought that felt spoken directly into his skull. Chosen one, you can't sleep tonight until this happens. It's happening. He laughed out loud, a short, nervous bark. Chosen one? Yeah, right. Chosen to fix Mrs. Delaney's minivan transmission tomorrow at 8. But the laughter died fast. The words lingered, heavy, like they'd been waiting years to land. He paced the small room, floorboards creaking under his weight. Memories flickered, things he'd buried deep. The way his mom used to say, even when he was a kid, "Eli, you're different. God's got plans for you bigger than this town." He'd rolled his eyes back then. She died when he was 19, cancer taking her quick and quiet. He hadn't prayed since her funeral. Now, though, the restlessness wasn't just insomnia. It was anticipation, like standing on the edge of a storm you could feel in your bones before the first drop hit. He grabbed his keys, pulled on a hoodie, and headed out into the night. The streets were empty, sodium lamps buzzing overhead. He drove aimlessly at first, then found himself turning toward the old overlook on Miller's Ridge, the spot where teenagers parked to make out or drink stolen beer, the place with the best view of the valley lights below. He killed the engine and sat there, windows down, cool October air rushing in. The town looked small from up here, fragile. His life looked small too. And then it happened. Not fireworks, not angels singing, just a quiet, unmistakable knowing. It started in his chest, a warmth spreading outward like someone had lit a lantern inside him. Memories rose unbidden. Every time he'd helped someone without being asked, the single mom whose car he fixed for free when she was crying in the waiting room, the kid he taught to change oil so he could save for college, the nights he'd sat with his dying mom holding her hand even when it terrified him. Small acts, invisible to the world, but not to whatever was watching. The voice, his own thoughts or something deeper, spoke again, calm this time. It's happening because you've already been walking the path. The sleepless nights, they weren't punishment, they were preparation. You've been carrying the weight alone, thinking no one saw, but I saw. Every quiet kindness, every time you chose good when no one would know. The restlessness was me waking you up to who you really are. Eli's hands shook on the steering wheel, Tears came hot and fast. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried, not since the funeral. He whispered into the dark, "If this is real, what now?" The answer came as peace, not words, a certainty that tomorrow wouldn't be like every other day, not because money would fall from the sky or a miracle job would appear, but because he had changed. The chosen part wasn't about power or fame, it was about purpose finally clicking into place, like a gear meshing after years of grinding. He realized that this that had to happen before he could sleep wasn't some external event, it was surrender, acknowledging he wasn't just a mechanic drifting through life, he was called, marked, not better than anyone else, just set apart for something only he could do. The warmth faded to a gentle glow, like embers after a fire. Exhaustion hit him all at once, the kind that comes after holding tension for too long. Eli drove slowly home, windows still down, letting the night air wash over him. Back in his apartment, he collapsed onto the bed without bothering to kick off his boots. This time, sleep came instantly, deep, dreamless, the kind he hadn't known in months. When he woke at dawn, sunlight slanting through the blinds, he felt different. Not invincible, not rich or famous, just aligned, ready. He made coffee, stronger than usual, and sat at the tiny kitchen table staring at the wall. A small smile tugged at his mouth. The title still echoed faintly in his mind, but now it felt like a promise instead of a warning. From that night on, Eli Harper didn't talk about it much. He didn't need to. He just lived it, one quiet act of courage at a time, fixing cars, helping neighbors, showing up when it mattered. And every once in a while, when the night grew long and the old restlessness tried to creep back in, he'd remember that ridge, that moment, and whisper to the dark, "It's already happening." Then he'd close his eyes and sleep would come easy. In the heart of Willow Creek, a sleepy American town nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, where the autumn leaves painted the landscape in fiery reds and golds, Elias Harper, Eli to everyone who knew him, lived a life as predictable as the chime of the old clock tower downtown. At 34, he was the kind of man who blended into the background, broad-shouldered from years of wrenching engines, with calloused hands that spoke of hard work and a face etched with faint lines from squinting under hoods in the dim light of his garage. He rented the cramped apartment above Harper's Auto Repair, a family business he'd inherited from his father, who had passed it down with a grunt and a pat on the back before retiring to Florida. No frills, no fuss, just oil stains on his jeans and the faint scent of gasoline that clung to him like a second skin. Eli wasn't one for superstitions or soul-searching. Raised in a modest Lutheran household, he drifted from faith after his mother's death, finding solace in the tangible, the roar of a V8 engine coming back to life, the satisfaction of a bolt tightening just right. His days blurred into one another, waking at dawn with black coffee from a battered Mr. Coffee machine, flipping the open sign on the garage door, and burying himself in carburetors and timing belts until the sun dipped low. Evenings were spent with a microwave dinner and whatever game was on TV, or occasionally shooting pool at O'Malley's pub with a couple of old high school buddies who still called Willow Creek home. He'd dated sporadically, nothing serious. The last one, Sarah from the diner, had called it quits because, as she put it, "You're like a ghost, Eli, always there but never really present." But beneath that steady rhythm, something had been stirring for months. It began subtly, like a distant rumble of thunder on a clear day. Insomnia crept in, uninvited and relentless. At first, Eli blamed it on the heat of summer, then the chill of fall. He'd toss in his bed, the springs creaking under his weight, staring at the popcorn ceiling dotted with shadows from the street lamp outside. His mind raced with fragments, unpaid bills stacking up on the kitchen counter, the garage's leaky roof that he kept patching with duct tape, the emptiness of weekends without his mom's Sunday pot roast. Sleep evaded him, leaving him hollow-eyed and irritable by morning. One crisp October evening, as the town wound down and the last customers drove off with their repaired sedans, Eli locked up the shop earlier than usual. The air carried the bite of impending frost, and the streets were empty save for a few kids on bikes racing home before dark. He climbed the rickety stairs to his apartment, kicked off his boots, and collapsed onto the worn couch with a beer in hand. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, the restlessness hit harder than ever. It wasn't just fatigue, it was a pressure building in his chest, an urgency that made his skin prickle. He paced the small living room, the floorboards groaning in protest, and muttered to himself, "Come on, man, snap out of it." Then, like a bolt from the blue, the phrase slammed into his consciousness, not as a fleeting thought, but as a vivid, almost auditory declaration. "Chosen one, you can't sleep tonight until this happens. It's happening." He froze, heart pounding. "Chosen one?" he scoffed aloud, his voice echoing off the bare walls. Chosen for what? Bankruptcy? Or maybe to win the lottery I never play? But the words clung to him, insistent and unnerving. They stirred memories he'd long suppressed, his mother's bedtime stories about biblical heroes, ordinary folks called to extraordinary paths. "Eli," she'd say, tucking him in with a kiss on his forehead, "God doesn't pick the flashy ones. He picks the steady hearts, the ones who show up." Cancer had stolen him when he was just out of high school, leaving him to navigate adulthood with his dad, a stoic man who expressed love through oil changes rather than words. Shaking off the unease, Eli tried everything to force sleep. Warm milk, counting backward from 1,000, even an old relaxation app on his phone. Nothing worked. By 2 a.m., frustration boiled over. He threw on his faded hoodie, grabbed his truck keys, and stormed out into the night. The engine rumbled to life, a familiar comfort, and he drove without direction, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Willow Creek's quiet neighborhoods gave way to winding country roads, flanked by cornfields whispering in the wind. Eventually, muscle memory guided him to Miller's Ridge, a gravel overlook perched high over the valley. It was a place steeped in local lore, the spot where generations of teens had shared first kisses, smoked their first cigarettes, or gazed at the stars dreaming of escape. Eli hadn't been up there since high school, back when life felt full of possibilities. He parked at the edge, killed the lights, and stepped out into the chill. The town sprawled below like a patchwork quilt of glowing windows and streetlights, the river snaking through it like a silver thread under the moon. Leaning against the hood of his truck, Eli lit a cigarette, a habit he'd mostly quit but kept for moments like this. The smoke curled upward, and for the first time that night, he felt a sliver of calm. But then the pressure returned, stronger, radiating from his core like heat from an overworked engine. He closed his eyes, and the memories flooded in unbidden. He saw himself at 10, helping his mom deliver casseroles to the widow down the street after her husband passed. At 16, staying late after school to tutor a kid struggling with math, even though it meant missing football practice. In his 20s, after his mom's diagnosis, he'd driven her to every chemo appointment, holding her hand through the nausea, cracking dumb jokes to make her smile. And more recently, waiving the bill for the veteran whose pickup broke down on his way to a VA appointment, teaching the neighbor's boy, orphaned young, how to change a tire so he wouldn't feel helpless, sitting with old Mr. Jenkins at the nursing home on holidays because no one else did. These weren't grand gestures, no parades or medals, just quiet choices in a noisy world. Eli had always figured they didn't amount to much. Life was survival, not sainthood. But now, in the stillness of the ridge, a warmth bloomed in his chest, spreading like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't painful, it was illuminating. The phrase echoed again, but softer, almost reassuring. "Chosen one, you can't sleep tonight until this happens. It's happening." Tears stung his eyes, unexpected and raw. He hadn't cried since the day they lowered his mom into the ground, the rain mixing with his grief. "If this is you," he whispered to the vast night sky, voice cracking, "what am I supposed to do? I'm just a grease monkey in a dead-end town." The response wasn't thunder or visions. It was a profound peace settling over him like a blanket on a cold night. Insights cascaded. The insomnia hadn't been random cruelty. It was a wake-up call, stripping away distractions until he couldn't ignore the pull anymore. He'd been chosen not for glory, but for stewardship, of kindness, of resilience, of the small flames that keep communities alive. The this that had to happen was recognition, surrendering to a purpose woven into his everyday acts. He wasn't meant to leave Willow Creek or chase fame. He was meant to be its anchor, the one who fixed more than cars. He mended spirits, one unassuming deed at a time. As the warmth ebbed, leaving a gentle afterglow, exhaustion finally claimed him. The weight lifted, and his body sagged against the truck. He drove home slowly, the roads familiar yet somehow new, as if the world had tilted just enough to reveal hidden layers. Back in his apartment, he didn't bother with lights or routines. He fell into bed, boots and all, and sleep enveloped him like an old friend, deep, restorative, filled with dreams of open roads and guiding lights. Dawn broke with birdsong and the scent of fresh rain. Eli woke refreshed, the first time in weeks without the fog of fatigue. He brewed coffee, sat at the scarred kitchen table, and stared out the window at the awakening town. A smile crept across his face, tentative but real. The phrase lingered in his mind, no longer a torment, but a mantra. From that day forward, Eli's life didn't change dramatically on the surface. He still opened the garage at 8, still bantered with customers about the Steelers' latest game, but depth infused everything. He started a free clinic on Saturdays for folks who couldn't afford repairs, teaching basic maintenance to empower them. He volunteered at the community center, mentoring at-risk kids with stories of perseverance drawn from his own quiet battles. Word spread subtly. People sought him out not just for tune-ups, but for advice, a listening ear, a spark of hope. And when nights grew long again, as they sometimes did, Eli would drive back to Miller's Ridge, gaze at the valley, and remember that pivotal moment. "It's happening," he'd murmur to the stars, a quiet affirmation. Then he'd head home, heart full, and sleep would come, carrying him into whatever the next day held. In Willow Creek, legends aren't born of epic quests. They're forged in the everyday, by the chosen ones who finally heed the call. Eli Harper was proof. Sometimes, the greatest awakenings happen not with fanfare, but in the silence of a sleepless night, when the soul whispers, "It's time."